Well, Tom, what can you tell us about this group known as Snug there in Albany, New York?
They're all criminals.
Literally?
Yeah, literally. I mean, what's the idea behind Snugs is that they're taking convicted felons, who are either out on parole or maybe have served their time, and they are putting them out on the street to work in crime intervention.
Okay. Now there are other cities that have done this around the country. I recall in a couple of places, Chicago for one, they had a problem with some of these individuals reoffending. In Los Angeles, actually, one of these guys that actually was doing one of these programs, a guy by the name of Hector Big Weasel Marroquin, ended up going back to prison after he was caught selling guns illegally to undercover officers. These programs have, I think, somewhat a mixed track record. How does the program seem to be working in Albany right now?
Well, it depends on who you ask. If you ask the street cops, they tell you that it's not, that these guys are still criminals. If you ask the chief of police or the mayor or the supporters of Snug, they will tell you that it's working wonderfully, that they have lessened the crime rate by 17% or some such number, which is really not the truth, and the street cops are really, really fed up with these guys, and it was intimated to me that in fact that there is confidential information being shared with these people, confidential police information being shared from the highest levels.
So, okay, now I guess maybe another perspective of this, Tom, is that while they're spending funds and resources on this Snug program, does that mean that they're doing less of the things like the gun buybacks and some of the other anti-gun nonsense we've seen in Albany over the past couple of years?
No, because the gun buybacks were essentially being run by this fellow by the name of Reverend Charlie. Okay,
all right,
and he was he was raising money from some corporate sponsors and all of that. What this in fact means is that they cut some money out of the fire department's budget in a couple of other places, and during this time of short money and financial problems.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. We see around the country a lot of public safety budgets being cut. I don't know if Albany has had to deal with that, but interesting.
Yes, they have.
They have. So the fewer cops on the street, but we've got money for former, quote-unquote, former gang members to go out there and supposedly make the streets safer.
Yeah, now the state cut off their funding, okay? But, but somehow because of, some media pressure, found like 180,000 or something like that for them. But from what I understand, and this was not made public, but they were initially founded about a year and a half ago and funded with $4 million that in a year and a half has gone. Wow,
that is that's substantial.
Yes, it is. It's a sad situation. New York has closed either 5 or 7 prisons.
Yeah.
Okay, and have early paroled or let out more violent criminals than all of the other states in the nation combined.
Okay.
Okay, and I think that they're trying to use a program like this that may cost them a couple $100,000 as a feel-good measure to show the people that no, we are working on crime. We're trying this new avant-garde method of preventing crime on the street. But the thing, the people that no one ever asks, and are the street cops how it's working. And I don't know if they would really get a straight answer, but if you talk to them in private, they will tell you that it doesn't work, and they don't want to go on the record for it because they're afraid they'll get fired.
That bad?
Yeah.
And that's sad because you've got to be able to evaluate these programs on a reasonable basis, and certainly part of that is not going to come just from the chiefs and those who are looking at the numbers and the data, but that has to come in part from the cops on the streets who can tell you what the atmosphere and the mood are like in the neighborhoods that, frankly, are the most crime-ridden in the city.
That's right. That's exactly what has to be done. And public safety costs something, and if that cost is the monies that it takes to run a prison, to keep the real bad guys off the street, well, then society has to pay for that. Maybe it's time to cut some of the entitlements.
Tom, I'm not sure you're allowed to say that.
I take that back. I don't think we should cut all of the entitlements.
I don't think, boy, all of a sudden you're going to get calls from the media there. You make a statement like that. But, look, it is interesting, and I know that these cities are having to deal with these budget issues. I just find it fascinating that there in Albany they got the money for this, but the money for actual police officers, less money for that.
Yeah, and for the fire department. Albany is an old city.
Yeah.
The fire department is busy all of the time.
Absolutely right. Well, I'm glad you could talk to us about this, Tom. I'm going to keep my eye on other cities and see if their similar programs are also able to find funding when the number of cops on the street is going down. I think that's pretty interesting, funding felons to hang out and supposedly fight crime rather than actual police officers.
Sure, you are aware of what SNUGS is, gun spelled backwards.
Yes, I figured that out. It took me a couple minutes, but
yeah, me too. And I didn't mean it to sound like that. And it's the founders of the group and the people who are pushing it thought this was so neat. They came to me with the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association and asked us to fund part of the monies of the operation. And I said, "Well, are you kidding me?" And exactly like that. They said, "Well, yeah, we're a do-good organization." And I said, "Now listen to me." I said, "The name of the organization is SNUGS, right?" And they said, "Yes." I said, "That's gun spelled backwards." And I said, "I understand that you guys did it because it's the anti-guns, and that's what you're doing. And and you thought that was so cool that nobody would understand that." And they were absolutely amazed that I figured that out.
Well, I have to say, Tom, I'm guessing this group probably doesn't have a very high opinion of law-abiding gun owners.
No, they don't.
But you know what? You showed them. Hey, Tom, thank you so much, sir, for coming on the program. Look forward to talking to you again very soon.
Take care, Cam.
Tom King, head of the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, with us here on NRAnews.com.